Joining me now live here at the 2024 RNC is Donald J. Trump for President, Deputy Director of Communications, Caroline Sunshine. Caroline, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Your reaction to Madison's reporting on J.D. Vance's economic stances?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, J.D. Vance, I'm very proud to have him on our ticket. You know, President Trump was intricately involved in crafting the platform for the RNC this week. And at the top of that platform, it read dedicated to the forgotten men and women of America. J.D. Vance comes from one of those communities. I think he viscerally understands some of the economic suffering that takes place in those specific communities, and he's able to bring that to the ticket. In addition, she mentioned his youth, and I think something underreported in this election is that the economy is really important to young people. Young people feel like, especially in Joe Biden's America, they're having a difficult time affording the American dream, taking those next steps to homeownership, which we know also then precipitates often family, marriage, things that are really important actually to the fabric of our nation. So I think his perspective as somebody a little bit younger, a millennial, I guess, if you will, is also an asset.
There's an analyst on Wall Street who's saying that he's likely to spend a lot of time in arguably the three most important electoral college states, two of which border Ohio, Michigan and Pennsylvania. That must be a positive there. But I wonder, because this analyst is asking the question, Vance's potential blue-collar populist appeal could backfire in the suburbs, like Philadelphia, Detroit, Milwaukee, with his staunch feelings about some of these issues. Your thoughts?
I think, again, J.D. Vance is a tremendous asset to the ticket. I mean, President Trump is at the top of the ticket. He is the leader of our party. It's his brand that is really on the ballot. But I think, again, you know, I loved Tucker Carlson said this yesterday. He said, all the bad people in D.C. that I knew don't like J.D. Vance, and that's why I think he's the perfect pick for this ticket. So I think, you know, President Trump, when he first came down the escalator in 2015 and in 2016, talked about draining the swamp. That's something that still very much needs to happen. And I think that's a message that, yes, resonates in, you know, the swing states, as you talked about, the battleground states, those Midwest Rust Belt states that, yes, J.D. Vance's personal experiences, I think, speak to. But also, as you mentioned, in the suburbs, we have a government right now where I'm not sure who is the captain of the ship, but it's definitely a government that isn't working formed by the people.
Well, it's a good point to make. A recent New York Times Siena College poll shows President Trump making gains with registered voters age 18 to 29. Yeah. In a two-way matchup, Trump beats Biden 48% to 40%. Caroline, what other ways is the Trump campaigning winning over young support? Tell us how you see it in terms of what the young populations want and how Trump is responding.
Well, as always, we don't have to do much as a campaign. We just let President Trump be the best messenger that he is. But I want to tell you something interesting. There's a post on X that's going viral of a young woman named Stephanie Tyler who said, she wrote, I was a gender studies major in college. I cried when President Trump won the election in 2016. This is a young woman. She said, I was planning on sitting this election out. But after the assassination attempt on President Trump's life, when I watched him leap to his feet and have this Braveheart moment, she said, it awakened some kind of patriotism in me that I believe the direct quote was, my fancy feminism, white men bad hating brain could never. I don't think that reaction is isolated. Like I said, this is a young woman. And the last part of her post, I thought it was interesting too. She said, I'm going to vote for President Trump, and it feels so freeing to say it. Of course, it's not just about persona, it's also policy. President Trump just announced his new no tax on tips policy for hospitality workers. Look, a lot of hospitality workers are young people, right? Yeah. Same thing on the issue of war. You know, you look at J.D. Vance, who just joined the ticket. President Trump was the only president in the modern era not to get us into new wars. You look at the ranks of the U.S. military, anytime you see those casualty lists, right, it's always disproportionately young people ages 18 to 25. For example, like the 13 service members that Joe Biden couldn't remember died under his watch, right? All of those soldiers -1 were under the age of 25.
Yeah, what a horrible situation that was, the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. Let me get your take on Elon Musk and what he's doing, because the CEO, the Tesla chief, says that he's going to be donating $45 million a month to a super PAC, which is backing Trump. Musk endorsed Trump the same day he survived that assassination attempt at the Pennsylvania rally. Caroline, what does $45 million a month do for the campaign?
Well, it helps us bring President Trump's winning message to every corner of this country. Like I said, President Trump, I call him the great American fighter. You know, Ronald Reagan may have been the great communicator, but President Trump is the great American fighter, as he proved on that stage. And like you said, you saw Elon Musk just minutes after President Trump survived that assassination attempt on his life, coming out and endorsing him. President Trump's act of getting up and saying, fight, 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 was an inspiration to millions almost instantly. You know, those images at worst could have been a horrific day for this country. At best, they have become a symbol of hope and inspiration. When President Trump got up and said those words, fight, 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 he wasn't speaking to a specific voter demographic. He wasn't speaking to a specific subset of Americans. He was saying that for our country. That's a winning message that we intend to keep bringing, like I said, to every corner of this country from sea to shining sea.
How are you messaging toward women? I know we've seen a real change in the Black community, Hispanic community. They're talking about Asian community as well. What about suburban women, where President Trump had an issue with in the last election? Your thoughts on speaking to that group, and have you seen changes there?
Absolutely. Well, President Trump continues to make inroads with pretty much every demographic of voter that we see is abandoning Joe Biden. I actually don't think it's so much that these voters are abandoning Joe Biden. I think it's that Joe Biden has abandoned them. The country is clearly starving for unity. They are not finding that in the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is having a difficult time enough unifying its own party. This is a party that's definitely not qualified to unify this country. Look, but we also know that sometimes what women want gets misconstrued in the liberal mainstream media. I happen to be a young, suburban, highly educated woman, right? Security is really important to women. You can't anymore be in this country. You cannot be pro-open border and pro-women. If you look at a lot of the victims of these violent crimes committed by illegal immigrants, we've seen a lot of the times they have been suburban women. These have been women who were killed in broad daylight on hikes. This shouldn't be happening. So security is important to women. We know President Trump is on the right side of that issue. We know a majority of Americans, not just women, 62% of Americans, majority of Hispanics as well, want mass deportations for illegal immigrants. We also know the economy is important to women, right? Yeah. Women are 50% of that workforce. They're not seeing gains in their paychecks either, just like men in our country, but they also make decisions about the budgets in their household. And I might also add, it's not just women that we're making gains with. We talked about young people earlier. Young men is a demographic that President Trump continues to do exceptionally well with. And I think that's because the culture in this country telling young men that being strong is somehow toxic masculinity, they're rebelling against that. And in President Trump, they see, as I said, great American fighter, strength, somebody that they can admire.
And if, speaking of security, that is the theme today, Make America Safe Again. So we'll be watching that. Caroline, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Caroline Sunshine from the Trump campaign.